You saw some of the security measures being taken today. Are you comfortable that enough vetting is being done here before these evacuees are brought to the U.S.?
I am. I talked to the Customs and Border Patrol. I talked to the FBI that was here, the DHS folks that were here, along with all the other interagencies. A lot of interagency here, State Department, USAID, and a lot of people have different roles. So I talked to the security folks. You saw it. So what they're doing as people come in, they're getting their names registered. They're doing the biometrics. They check their irises. They do their fingerprints. They take a full facial photo. They run that against the 20 years of databases that we have in the interagency. They run it against the NCTC checks and the FBI checks. If the individual, if the evacuee has some sort of derogatory information or something suspect at all, it'll pop up as red or yellow. They've popped about 30,000 or so people through here. They processed about 30,000 people through here. And they've had, I think they said a couple of hundred or something like that have popped red. Once the individual comes out as red, something is up, then they go into an individual room and they start interviewing with FBI, CID, NCIS, those sorts of folks. And then they work through whatever the issues were. In many of the cases, they end up getting cleared. In others, we have to take further measures. But I'm very comfortable that these folks are being properly cleared through the FBI.
And they're being checked about 3 times with their biometrics before they even get to the U.S.
That's right, yeah.
Now, 77% of Americans say that they are in favor of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, the end of the war.
Yeah.
But 74% say they are not happy with how the withdrawal went. Could the withdrawal have been done better? Was it military planning that caused the people to not feel that the withdrawal was as it should have been?
Well, I think a couple of things. One is the collapse of the Afghan army happened at a much faster rate and very unexpected by pretty much everybody. And then with that is the collapse of the Afghan government. So that was definitely a surprise. But I will say that there was an awful lot of planning done, rock drills, rehearsals, etc. And what you saw unfold with this non-combatant evacuation operation was one of the contingency plans. And the speed at which it was executed, the flow of the aircraft, we had planes taking off every 30 to 45 minutes or so. We brought in 7,000 or 6,000 U.S. troops, and then there was about 1,000 more or so Afghan troops that secured HKIA. The first day was clearly chaotic, no question about it. You saw that on video, etc. But within about 24 hours, that settled down and it became a much more orderly process. The security of HKIA was challenging, to say the least, and we saw the bombing. But that would have happened no matter where it was. People talk about Bagram, wherever there's a perimeter, if there's no outside force, if there's no Afghan force securing it, and there wasn't any, then it's going to be U.S. forces on the perimeter, on the edge, and they were doing what they were asked to do, which is go out and screen and process people. So there's a lot of lessons learned, and I think we're going to go through that in a very systematic way. I know we are on the Joint Staff. I know Central Command will, and I'm sure the other departmental agencies will. From a military standpoint, though, military planning standpoint, I think U.S. 4A under Scotty Miller, Central Command under Frank McKenzie, those plans were done in detail. They were back-briefed, rehearsed. They were done through all the cabinet members were present at these rock drills, these interagency rock drills that were done, hosted by Secretary Austin at the Pentagon, all coordinated, all briefed up, all the way through all the senior officials. There was an extensive amount of planning in this. The whole idea of Bagram, for example, and securing Bagram, and whether it's Bagram or Kia, that kind of thing, people should go back and take a look at the type force that we had, the 2,500 troops. Those are advisors. Those weren't infantry battalions. Those are advisors. And in order to secure Bagram, you need, roughly speaking, about a brigade. So you need about a battalion to secure the 72 towers that are at Bagram. You got entrances, you got QRFs, you have an outer ring perimeter security that you have to do patrols, that's about another battalion. So right off the bat, that's 3 battalions. Then if you're going to be north of Kabul by whatever it is, 60 kilometers or so, you got a battalion that's going to have to secure that corridor. You're looking at, roughly speaking, about 5,000 or 6,000 additional troops on top of what it would take to secure Kaya. And when the president made his decision in April, we had to change a mission. And that mission was very clear. It was to take the force down to 0 by the end of the summer, by 31 August. and to provide military forces to protect the embassy as a bridging solution until a contract solution was in, because the president's intent was to keep the embassy going, and to help the Turks secure Kaya. To secure the embassy, to secure Kaya was about a 750-person, maybe a little bit less than 1,000 military mission, and that was basically a troop cap. So you could not, with the conditions that existed and the constraints and restraints of the mission, you couldn't secure Bagram. And then the question is, for what? Why would you secure Bagram? And the issue was, of course, to do the NEO, right? We got 124,000 people out of Kiev. So the flow, the volume was never an issue. And in fact, you got more people out of Kiev than you would have ever got out of Bagram, because they would have had to go from Kabul north 60 miles, 60 kilometers. So the planning was extensive. Those were actually thought out options. There were various branches and sequels to all of these things. And the other thing was a permissive environment. We had a government, you had an army. When the government and the army fell apart, then you're into a different contingency, which was the NEO. And that was called, and we brought in the forces to do it.
How many troops would you have needed to retake Bagram, as some people had suggested? How many troops would have needed, and what would the Taliban have taken that to mean?
Well, if we went in and retook Bagram, if that were to happen, if that decision were ever made, we had contingencies to do that, by the way, and those were briefed. But that's a significant troop commitment, number one. You're looking at 18th Airborne Corps. You're probably looking at 10,000 or more additional forces. And then you're going to have to secure Bagram, you're going to have to clear Kabul, and you're going to have to secure Kiev. So your total, you're looking somewhere in the range of 15 to 20,000 additional forces. And most importantly, you would reinitiate a war with the Taliban, which of course we could do, but that's what would have happened. So you would have been fighting the ISIS and the Taliban, and with all the casualties, etc. I know a lot of people are talking about it, but I wonder if the support would have been there, had that been done, had that decision been made. I personally think the military conditions did not warrant that. I think the military conditions warranted what we did.
And when you saw the Taliban sweeping across various districts, why wasn't the decision taken to halt the withdrawal at that point, when it seemed like these were dominoes falling?
You're talking about the withdrawal of 2,500? Because that's what we're talking about. So those 2,500, you have to separate the 2,500 from the NEO. The NEO are infantry battalions, special operations forces that are coming in specifically designed and tailored. The special purpose MAGTF, the ARGMU guys, and the 82nd Airborne units. Those are different type units. That 2,500 that drew down, those were advisors. Those weren't the kind of guys that do NEOs. So those are two different operations. One is the withdrawal of the forces, which we were directed to withdraw under the permissive conditions that existed in the late spring, early summer. And that's a retrograde of forces. We had to close 11 camps. We had to transfer those camps to the Afghan security forces, etc. So that's one option, one operation. The second operation is the NEO. And the NEO then is triggered by a series of deteriorating conditions that occur in late July and early August. And then the ambassador, NEOs are always triggered by the decision of an ambassador. Ambassador Wilson requested that a NEO be conducted on 12 August.
Is the U.S. safer today since the U.S. has withdrawn from Afghanistan?
Well, you know, this is something that I've thought a lot about. And I personally think that my military estimate is that the conditions are likely to develop of a civil war. I don't know if the Taliban is going to be able to consolidate power and establish governance. They may be, maybe not. But I think there's at least a very good probability of a broader civil war. And that will then in turn lead to conditions that could, in fact, lead to a reconstitution of al-Qaeda or a growth of ISIS or other myriad of terrorist groups. So I think the short answer to your question is we don't know yet, but the conditions are very likely, in my opinion, that, and I've testified this and I've said it in public, that you could see a resurgence of terrorism coming out of that general region within 12, 24, 36 months. And we're going to monitor that. Now, the challenge for us now, for the military and the CIA and the intelligence services, is we've got to execute what people have referred to as over-the-horizon counterterrorism activity. That will be more difficult than having bases on the ground, but it is possible to do it. And we're going to have to maintain very, very intense levels of indicators and warnings and observation and ISR over that entire region. We'll have to reestablish some human intelligence networks, etc. And then as opportunities present themselves, we'll have to continue to conduct strike operations if there's a threat to the United States. Those are decisions to be made later, but right now we'll be in the developmental stage of developing the intelligence picture.
Do you see a situation where U.S. troops will have to return to Afghanistan?
I think that would be a very difficult policy choice. I wouldn't say yes or no to anything, actually. I think it's too early to say anything like that at this point. But right now we need to continue to monitor the intelligence situation, and we need to continue to see if these terrorist organizations that threaten the United States are going to develop or not.
Why was it so hard to end this war after 20 years?
Well, I think it has to do with cost and risk to the situation, as you saw, a government and a military collapse in a very, very short period of time. Those were all conditions that various estimates analyzed and looked at, and I think that we started this withdrawal, if you will, 10 years ago. We had 97,000 or 98,000 American soldiers and about another 30,000 NATO soldiers, about 130,000 foreign troops in Afghanistan 10 years ago. And so this has been a 10-year, not a 10-month withdrawal. And over time, over successive administrations, we've drawn down the force. When President Trump signed the agreement in February of 20, we had, roughly speaking, I think it's 12 or 13,000, as I remember, U.S. forces. You had about 10,000 NATO forces. You had, I don't know, 15 or 20,000 contractors or so. And over the course of the following year, from February 20 to February 21, that force comes down to 2,500, 3,000-ish U.S. forces, small number of contractors. And there were a whole set of conditions that were part of the February 28th agreement. Some of those conditions were met, a lot of them were not. And then that then leads into the current situation. So Afghanistan's always been a very difficult issue. I think there was some fundamental issues going way back, right? Going back through the 20 years as you reflect on it. And there'll be books and articles and all sorts of things written about this. But one of the fundamental issues, I think, clearly is the corruption in the government, the legitimacy of the government itself not having the legitimacy in the eyes of the people. You saw what happened at the end. The senior government elites, they all just literally bugged out. So that was a fundamental issue that stretches back 20 years. I think there's other fundamental issues. The Army itself, the Army and the police forces were mirror imaged in many ways, and we created and developed forces that looked like Western forces. And I think one of the big lessons learned here is maybe those forces were not designed appropriately for the type mission. That was something that needs to be looked at. The intelligence we talked about. There's a whole series, there's probably 10 or 15 major strategic issues. The invasion of Iraq and taking forces out of Afghanistan to go to Iraq and not expanding the military at the same time. The idea that we didn't get bin Laden right off the bat when he was up in the Tora Bora Mountains right at the beginning of this thing. So there's a whole series of strategic issues that stretch over the 20 years that ultimately lead to a point where we're at right now. Now, on the positive side, if there is a positive to any of this, right, it's the people behind me. There's 124,000 people that got taken out by U.S. and Allied and coalition airfield. And there's 15,000 of them right here in these tents right behind us. Those people are going to be able to live in freedom. They're going to have an opportunity for a better life. And they're going to have an opportunity for a better life because of America's sacrifice. And those 13 that were killed the other day at Abbey Gate, they didn't die in vain. They died so that others will live free. That's a tough thing, but I was talking to one of the mothers of one of the severely wounded Marines, and she flew back from Landstuhl on an airline on one of our aircraft, and she was all teary-eyed as I visited the wounded up in Walter Reed, and her son is right there, wounded very, very severely. And she said when she was on the aircraft, there was an Afghan mother who had 4 other children, many of whom were here at Landstuhl in the hospital, and they were wounded too. And they connected, and it was at that point the Marine mother says to me, she turns to me and she says, at that point it all became clear to me. So war is a horrible, terrible thing, and I said this the other day in the press. It's a vicious, brutal, unforgiving human endeavor. None of it's good. None of it's good, and none of us like it. Well, those of us who serve hate it. But I can tell you with a high degree of certainty that the troops that have fought in this for 20 years, they made a difference. They absolutely made a difference. They protected the United States from a terrorist attack for 2 decades. Their efforts were not in vain. And the efforts over the last 20, 30 days to get out these people and bring them to safety and freedom. And we're not done yet. This is a transition to a State Department mission. There's a variety of agencies that are working. There's a public-private partnership happening right now with various groups. And we're going to continue to try to get not only the rest of the American citizens out, but the SAVs and others that are at risk. So this is a long-term effort. It's difficult, it's heart-wrenching, it's gut-wrenching on all of us who served there many, many years, but it is not in vain.
Thank you, sir.
I spoke to one colonel, Amy Gleason.